Under the fractured moon, blood oaths whispered secrets that no silver blade could silence. Ilara's breath fogged the air like a dying prayer as she stumbled through the snow-swept pines, the weight of rejection carving deeper than any claw. The pack's howls faded behind her, not in pursuit, but in dismissal, a chorus of indifference that echoed the Alpha's final words. "You are no longer mine, nor ours. The wilds will claim what we discard." Her furred boots crunched against the frozen earth, each step a betrayal of the life she'd known, the Omega bond severed like a thread snapped by indifferent fate. The cold clawed at her skin, seeping through the thin wool of her cloak, but it was nothing compared to the hollow ache in her chest, where the mark of her former Alpha still burned faintly, a scar that refused to heal. She had been Ilara of the Silverfang pack, once whispered to hold the goddess's favor for her quiet visions. Flashes of paths unseen, truths hidden in the weave of shadows. But visions meant nothing when the pack needed warriors, not dreamers. Her Alpha, Thorn, had chosen a stronger mate, one whose ferocity matched his ambition, leaving Ilara to the mercy of the borderlands. Banished under the blood moon's gaze, she carried only a small satchel, a few strips of dried meat, a flint for fire, and the one relic that bound her to the old ways, a silver pendant etched with lunar runes, its chain stained with the dark smear of her own blood from the rejection rite. It hung heavy against her breast, a symbol of broken oaths, warm against her chilled skin, as if alive with unspoken curses. The wind howled through the ancient forest, carrying the scent of pine resin and distant smoke, whipping her dark hair across her face like accusing fingers. Snowflakes danced in the pale light, settling on her lashes, blurring the world into a monochrome haze. Ilara paused at the edge of a ravine, her gloved hands gripping a gnarled root for balance. Below, the river had frozen into a jagged mirror, reflecting the moon's fractured face. She wondered if the goddess watched from there, indifferent to the exiles of her children. Strength, she thought bitterly, was not in fangs or fury, but in enduring the silence after the storm. Yet endurance felt like surrender, and surrender was death in the wilds. As night deepened, the cold burrowed into her bones, urging her onward. She followed a faint trail, one her visions had shown her in fragmented dreams. A path that twisted toward forgotten ruins, places where the old treaties between packs and shadows lingered. The Blood Treaty, they called it in whispers, an ancient pact sealed in vampire blood and wolf oaths, binding the nocturnal lords to the lunar pacts against greater evils. Ilara had studied its fragments in secret, piecing together runes from crumbling scrolls in the pack's hidden library, her mind a vessel for patterns others ignored. But knowledge was a dangerous gift for an Omega. It invited suspicion, not salvation. A low growl rumbled from the underbrush, freezing her mid-step. Not a wolf, too resonant, laced with a hunger that twisted the air. Ilara's hand instinctively went to the dagger at her belt, its blade etched with silver to ward off the undead. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the wind dying to a hush as shadows coalesced at the tree line. Eyes gleamed in the moonlight. Crimson, not amber, belonging to a figure that emerged like a specter from the mist. He was no ordinary wanderer. Tall and cloaked in midnight leather, his form cut an imposing silhouette against the snow, broad shoulders bearing the weight of unseen battles. His hair, black as raven wings, fell unkempt across a face pale as marble, marked by a jagged scar tracing his jawline as if clawed by fate itself. But it was his eyes that pinned her, vampiric red, flickering with the torment of eternal night, yet softened by a melancholy that spoke of lost thrones. This was no mere predator. He moved with the grace of royalty fallen, each step deliberate, as if the earth itself yielded to his sorrow. Ilara's instincts screamed to flee, the Omega in her recoiling from the alpha aura that pulsed from him. Alien yet intoxicating, a blend of wolfish command and vampiric allure. He was the vampire king, Draven of the Crimson Veil, whispered in pack legends as the betrayer who had shattered the blood treaty, dooming his kind to endless war. Fleeing his own shadowed court, hunted by rivals who scented weakness in his guilt-ridden reign, he had crossed into wolf territory seeking sanctuary, or perhaps oblivion. Their gazes locked across the frozen clearing, the air thickening with unspoken tension. Fear coiled in Ilara's gut, mingling with a forbidden curiosity, as if the pendant at her throat warmed in recognition. He did not advance, but his voice cut through the silence, low and resonant, carrying the weight of centuries. "Omega," he murmured, the word both question and command. "What brings a wolf to the edge of oblivion?" She swallowed, her breath visible in the chill, the snow swirling like veils between them. The moon above watched impassively, its light glinting off the blood-stained chain around her neck, a silent witness to the collision of worlds. In that moment, Ilara felt the stirrings of something ancient, a thread pulling taut, binding the rejected to the remorseful, the exile to the emperor adrift. The wind rose again, carrying the distant weave of pursuing shadows, and Ilara realized the wilds offered no mercy to the solitary. Yet in his haunted eyes, she glimpsed a reflection of her own fracture, a possibility that redemption might bloom from shared ruin. But trust was a luxury for the unbroken, and she was anything but. Ilara's fingers tightened around the hilt of her dagger, the silver biting into her palm like a promise of defiance. The Vampire King's gaze held her captive, those crimson eyes delving deeper than any wolf's stare, unearthing the fractures she had buried beneath layers of resolve. The pendant at her throat pulsed warmer now, its blood-stained chain a tether to the rejection that still echoed in her veins, as if it sensed the ancient bloodlines converging in this frozen clearing. She wanted to bolt, to let the snow swallow her steps and carry her far from this apparition of night and regret. Yet her feet rooted to the earth, curiosity warring with the primal fear that coiled in her belly like a serpent awakening. Draven did not move closer, his form a statue carved from shadow and sorrow, the wind tugging at his cloak to reveal glimpses of armor etched with faded runes, marks of a throne long contested. Blood crusted the edge of his sleeve, not his own, but fresh from some skirmish in the shadowed realms beyond the pines. He was wounded, she realized, not in body alone, but in the way his shoulders bore the invisible yoke of a crown stained by betrayal. The blood treaty, that fragile pact her pack had guarded in whispers, hung between them like an unspoken accusation. He had broken it, or so the legends snarled, unleashing vampires upon the borders in a bid for dominance that left rivers red and moons veiled in ash. And now, here he stood, an alpha in exile, his aura a storm of command laced with vulnerability that mirrored her own shattered bond. "You trespass on paths meant for the forgotten," Ilara said at last, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. The words tasted of ash, born from the pack's dismissal, but they were all she had left, a shield woven from solitude. The snow fell heavier now, veiling the world in white silence, broken only by the distant yowl of wolves that might be hers no longer, or the sharper cries of nocturnal hunters closing in. Draven's lips curved in a shadow of a smile, weary and devoid of mockery. "Forgotten. We are all exiles under this moon, little wolf. I seek no prey in you, only passage through these woods that once bowed to our shared oaths." His voice was velvet over steel, carrying the weight of centuries, each syllable resonating with the melancholy of a king who had tasted power's bitter dregs. He glanced at the pendant, his eyes narrowing as if it whispered secrets to him. "That mark you wear. It reeks of severed bonds. What alpha discards a seer like you?" The question pierced her, raw and unbidden, stirring the visions that had always set her apart, flashes of crimson rivers and lunar pacts unraveling like frayed threads. She had decoded fragments of the blood treaty in the pack's forbidden archives, tracing runes that spoke of alliances forged in mutual blood, where vampires lent their eternal vigilance to wolves against the elder shadows. Thorn had called it heresy, her mind a threat to his unchallenged rule. Now, facing this fallen king, the knowledge burned in her throat, unbidden and dangerous. "My Alpha sought strength in silence," she replied, stepping back, the snow crunching like brittle bones. "He found it easier to banish dreams than face them. And you? What drives a vampire lord to wolflands, if not the hunt?" His gaze flickered to the tree line, where shadows stirred unnaturally, the scent of iron and decay threading the air. Pursuers, his own kind perhaps, or rivals scenting the fracture in his reign. Draven's hand rested on the pommel of a sword at his hip, its hilt wrapped in leather dark with old blood. "Guilt," he admitted, the word dropping like a stone into still water. "I shattered what I swore to protect, and now the night turns against me. The treaty was my folly, a bid for peace that became war. I flee not from cowards, but from the echoes of my own decrees." Instinct pulled at Ilara, a magnetic tug deep in her core, Omega to Alpha, Wolf to the ancient other that shared their lunar blood. It was denied, rationalized as survival's trick. The wilds forged unlikely alliances when death loomed. But curiosity bloomed in the fear, a spark amid the cold, wondering if this tormented sovereign could see the worth her pack had blinded itself to. The pendant warmed against her skin, its runes seeming to glow faintly in the moonlight, as if the goddess herself traced the lines of fate between them. A branch snapped in the distance, sharp as a whip, and Draven tensed, his crimson eyes scanning the gloom. "They come," he murmured, the wind carrying the faint rustle of wings and claws, vampiric thralls, or worse, the feral shades unbound by the broken treaty. Ilara's heart pounded, the rhythm syncing with the pulse she imagined in his veins, eternal yet aching. Fear urged her to run alone into the ravine's embrace, but the connection stirred something deeper, a recognition of shared exile, of wounds that bled invisibly. She met his gaze again, the snow swirling like spirits around them, the moon casting silver halos on his scarred jaw. "Then run with me," she whispered, the words escaping before reason could cage them. It was not trust, not yet, but a fragile bridge born of necessity and that insistent pull. Draven nodded once, a gesture heavy with unspoken gratitude, and they turned as one toward the deeper woods, the pendant swaying between them like a blood-bound compass. The forest swallowed their steps, the air thick with the promise of refuge and revelation. As the yew-howls grew closer, a symphony of pursuit under the indifferent stars. In that flight, Ilara felt the first threads of empathy weave through her isolation, tender and treacherous, hinting that redemption might hide in the shadow of a king's remorse. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The snow-laden branches clawed at the sky like desperate fingers as Ilara and Draven plunged deeper into the heart of the ancient forest, their breaths mingling in ragged clouds that the wind tore apart. The pendant at her throat thrummed against her skin, its blood-stained chain an insistent pulse syncing with the frantic rhythm of her heart, as if it drank in the chaos of their flight. Pursuit echoed behind them, sharp cracks of underbrush yielding to claws, the guttural snarls of vampiric thralls unbound by the treaty's fragile chains. These were no mere shadows. They were Draven's forsaken, twisted remnants of his court, driven mad by the betrayal he carried like a crown of thorns. Ilara's legs burned with the effort, the frozen ground treacherous beneath her boots, each step sinking into drifts that pulled at her like the earth's own reluctance to release the exiled. Fear sharpened her senses, the cold air laced with the metallic tang of blood and decay, a scent that coiled in her nostrils and stirred the wolf within her to wary alertness. Yet amid the terror, Draven's presence loomed protective, his longer strides guiding them through the gloom, his crimson eyes scanning the tree line with the precision of a predator-turned guardian. He was no ally by choice, she reminded herself, rationalizing the strange warmth that bloomed in her chest as mere survival's illusion. An Omega and a vampire king, fates as mismatched as moonlight on bloodied snow. But the pull was undeniable, a thread woven from shared fracture, drawing her closer even as instinct screamed to sever it. "There!" Draven rasped, his voice cutting through the howl of the gale, pointing to a jagged outcrop where the pines parted like sentinels. A cavern mouth yawned in the rock face, veiled by icicles that gleamed like fangs under the moon's pale scrutiny. They stumbled inside, the darkness swallowing them whole, the air thick with the musty scent of stone and forgotten earth. Alara pressed against the rough wall, her chest heaving, as Draven dragged a fallen boulder to seal the entrance, his muscles straining beneath the cloak, veins standing out like rivers of shadow on his pale skin. The effort drew a hiss from him, and she caught the glint of fresh blood seeping from a gash on his forearm, his own this time, torn by the thrall's initial ambush. The cavern was a sanctuary of sorts, its depths echoing with the drip of melting ice, the walls etched with faint runes that mirrored those on her pendant, ancient wards against the night. A small hollow cradled the remnants of an old fire pit, charred bones scattered like omens. Draven knelt there, striking flint with a practiced hand, coaxing flames to life from damp tinder. The fire bloomed reluctantly, casting flickering gold across his scarred features, illuminating the torment etched in the lines of his face. Crimson eyes met hers across the glow, holding a vulnerability that pierced her defenses. And for a moment, the world narrowed to the crackle of flames and the shared silence of the hunted. Alara slid down the wall, knees drawn to her chest, the cold seeping through her cloak like accusatory whispers. The pendant rested heavy in her palm now, its runes seeming to pulse with the fire's light, as if awakening to the convergence of bloodlines. Outside, the wind mourned, carrying the thrall's distant cries, inhuman wails that twisted the air into something feral. "They will not cease," Draven said softly, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the stone. He tore a strip from his cloak, binding his wound with deliberate care, the blood staining the fabric a deep, accusing red. "My folly unleashed them. The treaty bound us once, vampires and wolves, eternal watch against the void. I sought to rewrite it for power, and now the night devours its own." She watched him, the fire's warmth a fragile barrier against the chill that gnawed at her bones, mirroring the ache of her rejection. Thorn's dismissal replayed in her mind, his amber eyes cold as he severed the bond, leaving her adrift without pack or purpose. Yet here, in this king's confession, she glimpsed a mirror to her own exile, guilt as the true exile, wandering endless. Empathy stirred unbidden, a tender shoot amid the frost, softening the edges of her fear. "And what of the wolves?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs. "Your war spilled into our borders, turning allies to ash. My pack guarded the treaty's secrets, pieced them from blood and bone. We paid for your ambition with silence." Draven's gaze dropped to the flames, the fire reflecting in his eyes like captured stars. He extended his bound arm toward the heat, the scent of singed blood rising sharp and intimate. "Ambition was the mask for desperation," he admitted, the words heavy with centuries of regret. "The elder shadows stir beyond the veil, entities older than Moon or Fang. The treaty was our shield, forged in mutual blood. I broke it fearing betrayal from within my own, and in doing so, betrayed all. Now I am king of ruins, fleeing what I wrought." His eyes lifted to hers, crimson depths searching. And in that look, Alara felt the bond deepen, not as romance's spark, but as recognition, a shared wound calling to another. The thrall's howls grew nearer, reverberating through the cavern like thunder in veins, and Alara's hand instinctively went to her dagger, the silver hilt cold against her palm. Draven rose fluidly, positioning himself between her and the sealed entrance, his form a shield of shadow and resolve. "Stay behind me," he murmured, the command laced not with dominance, but with a quiet plea, the alpha in him yielding to the protector. She nodded, rising to his side instead, their shoulders brushing, a fleeting contact that sent warmth threading through her, chasing the isolation's bite. Together, they braced as claws scraped at the boulder, the runes on the walls flaring faintly, repelling the assault with bursts of ethereal light. In the fire's glow, as the thralls battered futilely against the wards, Alara felt the shift, fear yielding to alliance, curiosity forging into something resilient. The pendant warmed against her chest, its blood a bridge between them, whispering of destinies entwined. Draven's glance sideways held gratitude unspoken, his melancholy aura softening in the shared vigil. What was strength, she pondered amid the din, if not choosing to stand with the broken rather than against them? The night pressed in, but in that refuge, empathy bloomed into bond, fragile as new ice yet unyielding, hinting that redemption might be forged not in solitude, but in the fire of mutual guard. The thralls retreated at last, their cries fading into the wind's lament, leaving the cavern in hushed aftermath. Alara met Draven's eyes across the dying flames, the moon's light filtering through cracks like silver veins, and in that silence, the weight of unspoken choices hung heavy. A moral crossroads where compassion might yet eclipse the scars of betrayal. The cavern's hush deepened into a sacred vigil, the fire's embers pulsing like a hesitant heartbeat against the encroaching dark. Alara sat cross-legged on the stone floor, the chill seeping through her cloak like forgotten regrets, her fingers tracing the pendant's runes absent-mindedly. Its blood-stained chain lay coiled in her lap, warm as a living vein, absorbing the firelight in faint, ethereal glimmers. Draven lingered near the sealed entrance, his silhouette a sentinel of shadow, crimson eyes reflecting the dying flames as he listened to the wind's mournful sigh outside. The thralls had withdrawn, but their absence felt like a coiled threat, the night holding its breath for the next unraveling. She studied him in stolen glances, the way exhaustion etched deeper lines into his marble-pale face. The scar along his jaw, a silvered reminder of battles that had claimed more than flesh. Guilt clung to him like frost on barren branches, a king's remorse that mirrored her own quiet unraveling. The pack's rejection, a wound that throbbed in tandem with his confessed folly. Empathy had taken root in the refuge's fragile peace, transforming fear into a tentative bridge, but trust remained a distant star, rationalized as necessity's cruel jest. An omega and a vampire sovereign bound by flight and fire. What folly was this under the moon's indifferent gaze? Draven turned at last, his movements fluid yet weighted, crossing the cavern to kneel before the fire. He added a splintered branch from the pit's edge, coaxing the flames higher, the crackle filling the silence like whispered incantations. Sparks danced upward, illuminating the runes on the walls, ancient wards that hummed faintly, as if echoing the pendant's pulse. "The night spares us for now," he said, his voice a low timbre that resonated through the stone, stirring the air with the scent of charred wood and his own faint metallic aura. "But dawn will bring sharper eyes. The elder shadows stir, drawn by the treaty's fracture. Without it, our worlds bleed into one another, wolf and vampire, prey and eternal hunter, lost to the void." Alara's gaze fell to the pendant, its lunar etchings seeming to shift in the firelight, runes aligning like stars in a private constellation. Her visions had always come unbidden, fragments of paths veiled in shadow. But here, in this womb of rock and flame, they pressed closer, insistent as the blood in her veins. The rejection had cracked something open within her, a dam breached by Thorn's cold decree, unleashing the full tide of her gift. She had hidden it, piecing together the blood treaty's secrets in solitude, decoding its blood-bound clauses from faded parchments. Alliances forged in mingled essence, vampires pledging nocturnal vigilance to wolves against the abyssal entities that hungered beyond the veil. Her pack had dismissed it as Omega whimsy, but the runes sang truths in her mind, patterns weaving destiny from despair. A shiver ran through her, not from cold, but from the awakening stir. The pendant grew hot in her palm, its chain coiling like a serpent tasting the air, and visions flooded her. Crimson rivers carving through snow, lunar pacts unraveling like frayed sinew, Draven's throne crumbling under the weight of his ambition. She gasped, the images vivid as fresh wounds, shadows with eyes like bottomless wells, clawing at the barriers the treaty had held. Wolves and vampires standing back to back under a blood moon, their blood mingling to seal the rift. Her breath came shallow, the cavern blurring as the gift manifested fully, no longer fragments, but a torrent, pulling her into the weave of fate. Draven's head snapped toward her, his crimson eyes widening as the air thickened with unseen energy. The fire flared unnaturally, flames leaping high to lick the cavern ceiling, casting wild shadows that danced like spectral witnesses. "What sorcery is this?" he murmured, leaning closer, his presence a cool anchor amid the heat blooming in her chest. He reached out instinctively, his fingers brushing her wrist where the pendant's chain draped, and the contact ignited a spark. Not pain, but revelation, his eternal blood resonating with her mortal pulse, unlocking the vision's core. Alara's eyes glazed, unseeing yet piercing, as she whispered the treaty's hidden clause, words spilling from her lips like incantations drawn from the ether. The blood of the rejected and the remorseful. It mends what ambition tore, not dominance, but union, vampire oath to lunar seer, forging the veil anew against the elder dark. The runes on the pendant glowed now, silver light threading the air like veins of moonlight, illuminating Draven's face in stark relief. He recoiled slightly, not in fear, but awe, the weight of centuries crashing against this impossible truth. She, an exiled Omega, held the key he had sought in vain, the decoder of blood oaths, born to heal the fracture his guilt had wrought. The vision receded, leaving her trembling, the fire settling to a steady glow as if appeased. Draven's hand lingered on her wrist, cool and steadying, his touch a bridge across the chasm of their worlds. "Where did a wolf learn this?" he asked, his voice hushed with wonder and dawning realization, crimson eyes searching hers with an intensity that stripped away pretenses. The question hung between them, laced with the melancholy of a king glimpsing salvation in the discarded. He saw it now, the goddess's design, her as the pathfinder, the one whose rejection had freed her gift to mend his shattered reign. Not as consort or prize, but as equal in destiny's forge, her visions the light to his eternal night. Alara pulled back gently, the pendant cooling against her skin, its light fading to a soft ember. The revelation settled heavy in her chest, a moral precipice. To embrace this role meant binding her freedom to his redemption. Wolf blood entwining with vampire shadow, love as proof amid the pain. Or to flee, letting the treaty dissolve into war's red tide. The wind outside howled anew, carrying distant weavos that mourned the choices yet unmade, the moon filtering through cracks like a judgmental eye. Strength, she thought, lay not in power's grasp, but in yielding to the pull of compassion, even as it terrified. Draven's gaze held hers, remorse yielding to hope's fragile spark. And in that shared silence, the bond deepened, resisted no longer, but accepted as the first step toward rebirth. Yet doubt lingered, a spiritual thorn. Was this destiny's grace, or the goddess's cruel jest, turning exile into empire's chain? The fire crackled on, blood and moonlight their silent arbiters, as the night whispered of trials to come. Like if you believe rejection can become destiny. The dawn bled crimson across the snow-capped peaks, staining the world in hues of reluctant awakening as Ilara and Draven emerged from the cavern's shadowed womb. The pendant at her throat hung like a verdict, its blood-stained chain a cold reminder of revelations that bound them tighter than any oath. Visions still echoed in her mind, crimson rivers sealing rifts, unions forged in mingled essence, but the weight of them pressed against her ribs, a cage of destiny she had not chosen. Draven walked beside her, his steps measured, the wound on his arm bandaged but seeping faint red through the cloth, mirroring the guilt that shadowed his every glance. The air hummed with tension, the wind carrying whispers of pursuit, not from thralls alone, but from the pasts that clawed their way forward like wolves scenting weakness. They crested a ridge overlooking the frozen valley where the Silverfang Pack's territory sprawled, a labyrinth of iced spires and ancient standing stones etched with lunar wards. Alara's breath caught, the sight a dagger to her core, the familiar howls rising in the distance, not as welcome, but as accusation. Thorn's pack, her former kin, moved like a silver tide through the mist, their forms blurred by falling snow, banners of wolf fur snapping in the gale. At their helm strode Thorn, his amber eyes fierce under the blood moon's lingering pallor, flanked by the rival Alpha she had glimpsed in visions. Kale, the traitor whose whispers had poisoned the treaty's guardians, turning pack against shadow for his own ascension. He was a hulking shadow of fur and steel, his pelt scarred from border skirmishes, eyes gleaming with the hunger of one who bartered oaths for power. Draven tensed, his hand drifting to his sword's hilt, the metal whispering against leather like a suppressed sigh. "Your ghosts," he murmured, his voice laced with the melancholy of one who knew exile's bite too well. Crimson eyes scanned the valley, calculating odds in the poetry of survival, vampire against wolves, king against pack. But Ilara felt the pull within her fracture, the Omega bond severed yet aching, stirring a storm of loyalty and betrayal. She had fled this world of fangs and fury, only for it to converge here, demanding judgment on the life she had pieced from scraps of forbidden knowledge. The wind howled a warning as Thorn's pack crested the opposite rise, their weavows a chorus of territorial rage, sensing the undead aura that clung to Draven like nightfall's shroud. Snow swirled in eddies, veiling the world in white fury, but Ilara stepped forward, the pendant warming against her skin as if urging confrontation. "Ilara!" Thorn's voice boomed across the gulf, raw with feigned concern, masking the shame of his discard. He halted his wolves, their breaths fogging the air in a wall of mist, eyes fixed on her with a mix of pity and suspicion. The wild spit you back, tainted by shadow, and with him, the treaty breaker. Return, or be claimed by the snow eternal. Her heart twisted, the rejection's scar flaring like fresh fire, the pack's indifference now a blade turned inward. Visions flickered at the edges, Thorn's ambition, blind to the elder shadows gnawing at the veil, Kale's treachery weaving discord for a rival throne. She had decoded the blood treaty not for glory, but survival, its runes revealing the fragile balance, vampire vigilance for wolf ferocity, blood mingled to hold the void at bay. Draven's folly had cracked it, but her gift could mend, yet at what cost? Freedom whispered in the wind's caress, urging her to vanish into the pines, leaving kings and packs to their wars. Love, or what stirred in its guise, tugged the other way, a redemption not for him alone, but for the world's teetering on ruin. Kyle laughed, a guttural bark that cut the tension like claws through flesh, his form shifting partially, fangs bared in mockery. "The seer returns with the Leech King? Did exile teach you to consort with the damned Omega? The treaty is dust, my dust. Wolves need no eternal watchers. We claim the night ourselves." His eyes raked Draven, Scenting the guilt that hung heavy, the vampire's ethical core of vulnerability in this arena of raw power. Thralls stirred at the valley's edges, shadows coalescing from the mist, drawn by the gathering storm. Kale's unholy allies, bought with promises of unbound hunting grounds. Draven's jaw tightened, the scar along it silvering in the dawn's light, but he held his ground, not with aggression, but the quiet resolve of one who had tasted power's poison. The treaty was no chain, but a shield, he called, his voice resonant, carrying over the wind like a lament. I broke it in fear, seeking to protect what you now unravel for greed. Ilara sees the truth, blood of remorse and rejection to reforge it. War serves the void, not victors. His glance to her was a plea unspoken, crimson depths reflecting the moral precipice, forgiveness for his past or the freedom of endless conflict. Ilara's fingers closed around the pendant, its chain biting into her palm, blood welling fresh, a symbolic offering that sent visions surging anew. She saw it all. Thorn's pack crumbling under shadow assaults, Draven's court dissolving into feral night, Kale's triumph birthing only deeper darkness. The choice loomed, visceral as the cold gnawing her bones, the snow melting to red slush beneath imagined battles. Love was no reward, but proof, a union of her visions and his vigilance, compassion over conquest. Yet freedom sang in her veins, the wild's call to roam unbound, unyoked to thrones or treaties. What was strength if not choosing mercy amid the howl of betrayal? Forgiveness might crown the fallen, but war's red tide tempted with the illusion of escape. Thorn advanced a step, his wolves flanking, the air thick with the scent of fur and frost, weavows rising in challenge. Choose, Ilara, pack or parasite. Your visions were weakness, prove them lies. Kale snarled agreement, shadows lengthening at his command, the valley a cauldron of simmering fates. Her breath steadied, the pendant's warmth spreading like resolve through her chest. She met Draven's eyes first, seeing the ethical king beneath the melancholy mask, then Thorn's, the alpha whose rejection had birthed her power. The wind whipped her cloak, snow stinging like tears unshed, the moon's pale ghost lingering in the sky as witness. The treaty lives in blood, not blades, she declared, voice clear amid the gale, stepping between them all. I choose neither war nor chains, but mending, join or fall to what stirs beyond. The valley held its breath, howls faltering into silence, the moral crossroads etched in snow and shadow. Draven's hand brushed hers, a fleeting anchor of shared remorse, while Thorn's gaze hardened, Kale's twisted in rage. Empathy warred with isolation in her soul, the spiritual thorn of destiny piercing deep. To forgive the past's fractures or let freedom devour all in compassionate fire. The dawn brightened, blood-red promises hanging heavy as the first clash of steel echoed, a judgment not yet rendered, but inexorably drawn. The valley trembled under the weight of unspoken oaths, the snow churning into a maelstrom as Thorn's wolves surged forward, their howls a primal dirge that clawed at the dawn's fragile veil. Ilara stood at the epicenter, the pendant's chain biting deeper into her palm, her blood welling fresh and mingling with the ancient stain, a crimson testament to the fracture she alone could seal. The wind whipped her hair like raven wings, carrying the metallic tang of impending violence, fur, steel, and the shadowed rot of Kale's thralls slithering from the mist-shrouded edges. Her heart thundered, not with fear alone but the raw ache of rebirth's threshold, where rejection's scar twisted into something sacred, demanding sacrifice over survival. Draven flanked her, his presence a cool bulwark against the tide, crimson eyes locked on the advancing pack with the melancholic resolve of a king who had long outlived his sins. His sword gleamed in the blood-red light, not drawn in conquest, but readiness, the scar along his jaw a silvered echo of battles that had forged his guilt into an ethical armor. "Stand with me," he whispered, his voice threading through the gale like a lover's vow, low and resonant, stirring the omega pull in her core. A bond resisted through nights of flight and fire, now accepted as the proof of redemption's fire. No longer rationalized as fleeting alliance, it bloomed tender amid the pain, a union born not of crowns or pacts, but shared wounds healing in the goddess's unyielding gaze. Thorn halted mere paces away, his amber eyes blazing with the fury of betrayed dominion, muscles rippling beneath his pelt as his wolves fanned out, fangs bared in a semicircle of judgment. "You dare invoke the treaty, exile?" he snarled, the words laced with the shame of his own discard, the bond he had severed now a ghost haunting his command. Kyle circled to the side, his hulking form a grotesque fusion of wolf and shadow, thralls coiling at his heels like smoke-given claws, creatures unbound by Draven's folly, their eyes voids that hungered for the Veil's tear. "Mending? The night is mine to claim," Kyle spat, his laugh a guttural rasp that mocked the spiritual weave Ilara felt pulsing in her veins. Visions cascaded anew, unbidden and visceral. Rivers of mingled blood, staunching the elder shadow's maw, but only through sacrifice. The rejected's freedom for the remorseful's throne, compassion's blade cutting deeper than war's. The clash erupted like thunder in frozen veins. Thorn lunged first, a blur of silver fur and rage, his claws raking toward Ilara in a bid to reclaim what he had cast away. Draven intercepted, sword meeting claw in a shower of sparks that lit the snow like fleeting stars, the impact reverberating through her bones. She stumbled back, the pendant flaring hot against her chest, its runes igniting in silver fire that seared the air. Wolves poured in, snapping and tearing at the vampire king's cloak, while Kael's thralls descended in a whirlwind of decay, their hisses mingling with weavoes that shook the standing stones. Blood sprayed, hot and coppery, splattering the white drifts, turning the valley into a canvas of red prophecy. Ilara's world narrowed to the pendant's glow, her gift surging like a lunar tide, decoding the chaos into patterns of fate. She saw the moral crux, forgiveness not as weakness, but the forge of true power, her visions the key to rebind what ambition had rent. With a cry that blended Omega lament and Seer's command, she thrust the pendant skyward, her blood dripping onto the snow, mingling with droplets from Draven's fresh wounds. "By the goddess's vein, we seal anew." The words tore from her throat, raw and poetic, invoking the treaty's core. Union over enmity, the rejected Omega and guilty king as anchors against the void. The air thickened, ethereal light erupting from the pendant in tendrils of moonlight that lashed like whips, ensnaring Thorn's wolves mid-leap. They yelped, recoiling as visions flooded their minds, the elder shadows breaching the veil, devouring packs and courts alike in endless night. Kyle roared, charging through the glow, his thralls shattering against the wards like brittle ice, but Draven met him blade to claw, their duel a visceral ballet of remorse and treachery. The Vampire King's movements were poetry in motion, ethical precision over brute force, each parry a step toward absolution, his guilt fueling not vengeance, but protection. Ilara joined the fray, her dagger flashing silver, guided by prophetic instinct. She slashed at a thrall's flank, the creature dissolving into ash that stung her eyes like unshed tears. Thorn broke free of the light's grasp, barreling toward her, his eyes a storm of regret and denial. "You were mine to break," he bellowed. But the words faltered as the pendant's power crested, forcing truth upon him, the goddess's design, her rejection the catalyst for this rebirth. Ilara sidestepped, her blade grazing his shoulder, drawing blood that sizzled on the snow, symbolic as her own. "No longer," she whispered, voice steady amid the whirlwind, the wind howling approval as the valley's stones hummed in resonance. Draven dispatched Kael with a final, merciful thrust, through the heart, not the head, ending the traitor in a burst of shadow that fed back into the veil, the elder dark recoiling with a distant abyssal wail. The light peaked, blinding, as Alara and Draven clasped hands over the pendant, their blood merging in a warm rivulet that traced runes in the air. The treaty reformed. Invisible chains of crimson and silver weaving through the ether, binding vampire vigilance to wolf ferocity once more. Thorn's pack stilled, howls turning to whimpers of awe, the alpha collapsing to his knees in the snow, eyes wide with the weight of forgiven folly. The dawn shifted, crimson yielding to gold, the moon's ghost fading as the veil solidified, shadows retreating like defeated specters. Ilara sank beside Draven, exhaustion crashing over her like a benevolent wave, the pendant cooling to a gentle warmth against her skin. His arm encircled her, tentative yet unyielding, the touch a rebirth's embrace. Love accepted, not as reward but redemption's quiet proof, tenderness forged in blood and choice. "You mended more than oaths," he murmured. Crimson eyes softening to garnet in the light, his melancholy lifting like mist under sun. She leaned into him, the wild's call silenced, freedom transmuted into purposeful union, the goddess's symbols etched eternal in their scars. The valley hushed, snow settling like a benediction, Uivau's distant echoes of renewal. Strength, Alara knew, was mercy's crown. Compassion, the true throne amid the ruins. In that sacred silence, rejection birthed empire, exile kindled flame, and two fractured souls wove destiny's tapestry, whole at last. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.